you know, complain about, someone or the other will stand up and say, what about the Pandits of Kashmir? So this is the selective outrage problem, right? So you can't be outraged about anything because someone will dig up something that has happened, at any point of time and say, what about then? You didn't say anything then, so shut up now. And that has been the larger and growing discourse, which I think, and this is where the Hindu-Muslim thing, so you can complain about, say a Muslim fatwa against playing chess, and people will say, "Acha, but what did you say when Godhra happened?" Or you can do the reverse thing about a Hindu, and they will say, "Acha, what were you doing when the car sevaks were burned?" So in the end, the net result of that is, forget comedy. You can't be, people don't realize that if you really were not, we are human. We are selectively outraged by some things. Anubhav is outraged by service on Emirates Airlines. I might be more outraged by Indigo. It's just human. If we were actually equal opportunity outraged people, we would be locked up in a psych ward because we would be constantly outraged.
Well, I think India has become a bit of a psych ward, hasn't it?
But that narrative is very interesting because that's because we're not following one narrative, right? If you look at any thread of argument is Socrates understood it, right? Which is a logical thread. You'll always have someone, like you said, bring up a parallel thing. Even if you write, my aunt had an accident. What about the Nakshal problem? But I was having... This was not what?
Your aunt was a Nakshal.
Yeah, correct. So exactly. So there's a parallel sort of... So we're not listening to a thing. But in terms of the pressure of being funny, I think that I often wonder if this happens to other professions. I mean, there are comedic writers, comedic actors, and I'm just throwing this question out to you. What happens if you're a stand-up comedian, and I want to know how it is for you guys, is that you'll go somewhere, particularly you come back to your hometown, you'll go somewhere socially, and there's always this pressure, right? You say something funny, it's a joke, and it happens everywhere, Delhi, Bangkok, wherever you go. And I think that no one goes to a neurosurgeon. If you're a brain doctor, no one says, "Acha, brain surgery kore din to."
It happens in Calcutta. My dad was a doctor. People were constantly rolling up their pants.
Correct.
And especially
I remember as a kid, it was happening all the time.
Especially if you're a neurosurgeon, they're still showing you the little card on their foot.
You know what? Because this town, I've realized, my favorite thing about this town is, other towns, the wealthier you get, right? People are like, he has a steel company and he has an airline company. Here people collect ailments. I have arthritis and heart problem. He's like Ambani.
I had a relative, if you asked him how he was a কি বলবো না এখান থেকে এখান অবধি একটু ক্যান্সার হয়েছে
And someone else will say, look, একটু cancer.
At least একটু ম্যাচ তো করবেই।
And friends will say, look from where to where he's gone.
Alright, I'm going to change this a little bit. I'm going to, personal experiences. I'm going to give you my personal experience of where comedy just was thrown out of the window. I did a television serial called G Mantri Ji and a sequel to that called G Mantri Ji, G Pradhan Mantri Ji. Now, listen to this carefully. G Mantri Ji ran on for the whole 19 episodes that we shot. G Pradhan Mantri Ji ran for one. There were 16 episodes, ran for one. And the objection was this, that you can crack a joke about a Mantriji because there are many Mantrijis, but there's only one Pradhan Mantri, and therefore you are being personal over here. You can't do that. So there are 15 episodes of G Pradhan Mantriji lying somewhere, gathering no, it was shown in Mauritius. Sorry, it was shown in Mauritius. But what do you do when I'm scared to be funny?
Yeah. No, but I'm curious. I just have a question, Jan. So the great comedies, Mr. Ya Mrs., Jay Pradhamanchi, right? Like I'll be honest with you. I don't know about you guys. I got into comedy seeing this man, right? Like because that was what you saw, and that was my inspiration in the 80s. That was great comedy because we had HOS and we had great comedy. It wasn't like this. There wasn't like wah, that stuff wasn't there. It was stories. Like now you see any of these movies, these sex whatever, people doing comedy, they'll do something funny. There'll be an alligator that'll show up or whatever, and they'll have a noise like Italian restoration drama. Wah, you're supposed to know it's funny, and it's just retarded, right? And that sort of stuff. There's noise here right now. But what inspired me was that, and I wonder when it was Doordarshan, it was centrally controlled. Did you guys ever sit in a room and say, who's going to be offended by this? Will anyone? Was that ever a thing that we talk about nowadays?
No. No, we were given the scripts and we rehearsed them and we did them not in the least bothered about who was going to say what. And I must confess that Doordarshan in those days was, we thought they were tough taskmasters, but later on when we started performing for private channels, we found that, hey, they were easy. Doordarshan was easy compared to the self-censorship, the so-called quality control that had come. It was a load of, excuse my language, it was a load of crap, you know. It was very hard working in this mahol. It was much easier working over there. So there were no questions at all about censorship. And you didn't. You don't have to use four-letter words. You don't have to use any kind of objectionable stuff to be funny. I don't think so. I think you can just have fun. If you're having fun, you're funny.
Exactly. And what happened to, you often wonder what happened to that writing? What happened to Wagle Ki Duniya? What happened to Karamchand? Like all the stuff that inspired us to get into, because they were taken from great British sitcoms.
I must say your standards were very low if that's what inspired you.
Well, have you seen the stuff that's out now? Have you seen, I mean,
Am I right?
as opposed to being inspired by Masti Sazi, like, look at where we live now. I mean, it's just a different world. I don't think it's gotten any better.
You mentioned Wagle Ki Duniya. There was the other one with
Malgudi Days. Of course.
It was such a great slice of life, and it had its comedic moments which were genuinely funny.
R.K. Narayan is hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah, you sat there and you guffawed. There was a polite little laugh. You don't get humor like that.
Middle class comedy, that comedy of manners, the Indian Seinfeld, I don't see that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very key question, which is, are you afraid to be funny? I think the question before that is, more than afraid, I think it's very necessary for us to be funny right now, because there are so many things that, you can't say upfront, but you can say if you're not so upfront, if you're being completely absurd. For example, I mean, if you in today's environment, if you criticize the Prime Minister, or if you're in UP or any state and you criticize the Chief Minister, you can get into a lot of trouble, right? But when you write about, say, Narendra Modi patrolling the border so that nuclear missiles can bounce off his 56-inch chest, it's hard for people to take you to court because of that. Because, what are you going to argue in court? Your Honor, here is a picture of the chest of the PM. As you can see, nuclear missiles cannot bounce off. So, it's difficult to take that whole thing seriously and, take it forward. So I think it's very necessary. And the other reason why humor is very, very important right now, and I think it's a part of natural justice, is because if you look at the authority figures in our country right now, all the businessmen and the politicians and the rich people, the people who are above the law, the thing is that of course, the thing is that, we've given them so much as a nation. They're so rich, influential, happy. The least they can do is give us a few laughs back.
No.
I think that's just natural justice. We should get something for that deal.
Have you tried? They're just not funny. I can't crack a joke about an Ambani who's super rich you're talking about. I just don't think he's funny. I think he's evil, but not funny. Or name any other big names.
Well, but there is a reason for that, because I think in a way politicians, in much as we give them a bad rap, for sending people to jail because you cracked a joke or forwarded a cartoon or whatever, people still are able to make fun of politicians, whereas that super rich corporate...
Not anymore. You try making fun of a politician.
No, what I'm saying, you will still see jokes about politicians, as opposed to industrialists and big corporate houses are really off limits in a way, because they directly pay the bills of the channels, and so they're even more off limits. So you don't even venture to figure out if there is a joke possible about an Ambani, because there's no chance. There's half a chance.
All the channels anyway.
There's half a chance that you try 3 Narendra Modi jokes and maybe half of one will pass through. But there is this exaggerated thing that has definitely happened now. When I was writing for First Pose, and we once did a whole thing about Narendra Modi's headdresses. Because he wore that hornbill hat, and then he went to Ladakh, and we had compared his dress in Ladakh to looking a bit like an Oompa Loompa from the. And then people were just, how can you say that about the Prime Minister? You're actually saying that about the Prime Minister's dress. It's not the office of the Prime Minister, but those things have become conflated. So commenting about the Prime Minister's dress becomes a comment on the Prime Minister. And I think what has changed from the time you were talking about is that the feedback loop has completed. You were part of Doordarshan, which is sort of part of the government, and you were talking to the audience. The audience was not talking back to you in the way it is now. So now when the troll army gets to work on because you have insulted the Prime Minister, then your editor, your corporate masters have to deal with fallout.
I'm glad you brought up the troll army. I'm just coming to you. That is it. What? Why? You won't go to jail, maybe, but the troll army will get you.
The funny thing is that I've written about very uncomplimentary things about Rahul Gandhi, about Jyoti Bose, about...
He doesn't have much of a following.
Jyoti Bose is dead.
He's dead.
But in the book he's not. He comes back to life due to traces of DNA found on a whiskey glass, like Jurassic Park. They use the same method and they bring him back. Unfortunately, he comes back at the same age that he left us, so it's a bit complicated. But my point is that I've made a lot of fun. But that's an example.
Nice plug for his book. You get it?
It was, wasn't it? But the point I want to make is I've made a lot of fun of all kinds of politicians and important people in books and columns and stuff like that. The truth is, I've never faced a single literally, I've never faced a single objection from anyone. I've not been the victim of any major troll attacks, because I think it's a question of how committed you are to comedy. If you take things to a completely absurd level where any sane person can say, see ke inke saath jhagda karke fayda nahi hai, ye to pagal hai, pagal. If you can achieve that level, it's the court jester, right? Nobody ever took the court jester seriously. Nobody, grabbed Birbal by the neck and said, string him up right now. They never said that.
Yet in those days, a court jester, the Birbal was the wisest man in court, wasn't he?
Well, thank you.
Clown,
I think you're pretty good too. I never, it's just, I'm so sorry. I'm just so touched.
So aap paal hain ki pagal hai? Bolo.
Well, I'm hoping, that's, what is that Oscar Wilde line? Society that has lost its madness has also lost its reason.